This was one of the videos recorded for one of the meetings at Rashi Christie at UTSA. Aside from a few minor edits to clean up the long pauses, the ums and the uhs, it's virtually the exact same video on the other channel. Some of the ways I ascertain to Bayesian probability principles have changed over the years, and the way I would describe things have definitely changed. But in any case, here's the video. Hope y'all enjoy. Okay, we're recording just my face so you guys don't have to worry about being on screen or anything like that. Today we're going to be presenting on the philosophy of miracles. A lot of times in the discussion sphere online you'll hear the claim that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And don't get me wrong, I sympathize with the idea that the more spectacular the claim, the more evidence that's needed to ascertain to it. But the idea that the miracle is inherently the most improbable event just doesn't bear for many philosophical reasons. Because you'll hear from, say, Dr. Earman, you can't say that the resurrection happened because by definition, the resurrection is the most improbable event. And what historians do is try to ascertain to the most probable event. We're going to be presenting on David Hume's arguments and critiques against his arguments. So David Hume is well known for creating this maximum that there's no amount of testimony that can ascertain to a miracle. We'll go over the origin of David Hume's essay and his hatred for organized religion. We'll even go a little bit over why his intellectual laziness doesn't come to par with his contemporaries of the time that did develop probability calculus to combat the idea that you can ascertain to rare events, because epistemically miracles are no different from rare events. It's just the fact that miracles ascertain to this quote-unquote supernatural. But anywho, then we're going to see how the rediscovery of Hume's maxim comes to a lot of these online discussions. We're going to discuss what does it mean for a miracle to occur, the definition of miracles, eyewitness testimony as evidence, what is the nature of claims and evidence with regards to miracle claims. And we'll be taking a look at the parable of the Indian prince, aka the king of Siam, mentioned by Newton, or was it Locke? Yeah, I think it was Locke. Naive induction, Reichenbach's straight rule. We're going to take a look at how you have to make good categorical assumptions in order to assess very complex problems like this. We're going to take a brief look at probability theory, Bayesianism, multiply attested eyewitness testimony, and a balanced view of Hume's lasting contributions. David Hume's origin story, his hatred for organized religion. So David Hume was a philosopher that grew up during the Enlightenment period, which is characterized by distrust for authoritarian regimes. And as a result, the church was also distrusted. He's best characterized as an Enlightenment atheist, although the proper term during that time was to say you're irreligious. There are many Hume scholars that document his views. Yeah, I just have a quote over here that describes how much he has a disdain for organized religion. Vulgar superstition is the word that he used to describe religious claims. The origin of Hume's miracle essay. Basically, he was in conversation with a Jesuit, and the Jesuit said that, oh yeah, there's some miracle performed in their convent. He began to organize a lot of topics for his treatise against miracles. This below over here is just the lineage of proposed essays that he developed that finally led to the inquiry of miracles. Hume's intellectual laziness. This does have to be mentioned. You hear someone like Matt Dillahunty say that Hume is the father of skepticism, and to be honest, compared to his contemporaries, he's an abject failure, as John Earman would put it. There is no reason for him not to respond to the robust probability calculuses that are developed to ascertain to miracle claims and or rare events. Figures like Richard Price, Thomas Bayes, these are all pretty renowned intellectuals in Great Britain around the same time. Others include Sherlock, Peirce, Chandler, Jackson, and West. The rediscovery of Hume's maxim. Skeptics say that any naturalistic hypothesis is more plausible than a supernatural event, no matter how improbable. And so a miracle by assumed definition is the most improbable event. And toward the end of part 1 of his inquiry, Hume announces a general maxim that no testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle. The superior only remains after deducing the inferior. The only way a testimony for a miracle can be good is if that miracle can become like a law-like generalization. And we'll see for several reasons that it just doesn't work like that. Conceptions of miracles, definitions used by critics and their contemporaries. Aquinas says that miracles violate nature. Spinoza says that miracles are evidence that God acted against his own nature. Now, the definition that we will take will be one that Locke espoused to, that it is a sensible operation contrary to the established course of nature and taken to be divine. That is to say, a miracle is like catching a phone while it is falling. You're not violating the law of gravity as it is falling. rather that you're putting an agent having its effect feed into the system. We have no reason to espouse to these other definitions of miracles anyway. That's not the theistic understanding of miracles, that they quote-unquote violate nature, that they violate God's decrees. This bottom line over here confuses epistemic versus ontic quality of miracles. Epistemic means being able to ascertain reasonably to in terms of belief. Ontic means by very nature. And so what Hume has a very hard time understanding is that for miracles, there's a difference from being able to ascertain to them in terms of belief versus the very nature of them. Just labeling it supernatural doesn't make it even more improbable. So Hume appeals to uniform experience, but many different uniform experiences have contradicted each other. So he'll say, well, if your experience of a miracle contradicts reality, which is attested to by uniform experience, then it probably didn't happen. But the problem is that uniform experience, quote unquote, has to be defined correctly. All humans across time, for example, have believed all sorts of things. Some of them do even believe in the existence of miracles. Consider that laws have a natural necessity operator. Hume doesn't provide a method to distinguish these and just blankets them as all, quote unquote, impossible. Does making a sandwich violate the second law of thermodynamics? Yeah, that's funny. George Campbell complained that laws of nature, like miracles, are testimonial. So the parable of the Indian prince is an interesting one. It basically goes over this Indian prince, or the king of Siam in the case of Locke. Here's testimony from a traveler who comes from a distant land that says, hey, I found this thing called ice, and it's basically solid water. And at first glance, he says, yeah, there's no way that water can just transform into anything solid. And then more evidence piles up and piles up and piles up till the point where he finally acknowledges the existence of ice. So the point is, at no point does the Indian prince take all of India to go visit this North Pole or like winter-like place to say, hey guys, ice is real, touch it, take photographs of it. You know, at some point, the testimony of distant travelers will overcome the epistemic need to ascertain to belief in ice. Same thing with outer space. George Campbell also made this critique that laws of nature are built off of individual testimonies. And as for the cause of miracles, so you will also hear this accusation in the online sphere that, well, even if the resurrection of Jesus happened, we can't know what the cause of it is. And so for Locke and the Newtonians, they knew better. Miracles gained their religious force from their combination with prophecy, from their timing and coincidence. It's not just the miracle you have to explain, it's also the cause of the guy who was able to predict it. So in the case of Jesus, you have to explain where he got the supernatural ability to predict his resurrection. And just for like an anecdotal example, we can guess someone passed a perfect GRE by cheating, but if someone predicted it beforehand, then we have good reason to investigate that single hypothesis and increase its probability, that a hypothesis alone, that he got a perfect GRE through cheating, probably because his friend knows his cheating methods or something like that. Easter egg video. All right, let's go, baby. So I actually made a video on this. So YouTube has this thing where like shorts can only be like 1 minute. I basically try to describe that one truth that yes, we can ascertain to the cause of miracles. Testimony does qualify as evidence. Yeah. It's just obvious that it does. And we'll see later on that's actually the basis of scientific inquiry. Proves God rose Jesus, not aliens, using philosophy and formal logic.
Happy to be shown that I'm wrong. Can we define supernatural?
A miracle is a sensible operation contrary to the established course of nature and taken to be divine, having a godlike cause.
Wow, we don't know of any natural explanation for this. Unconvinced by proposed natural explanations, therefore I am justified in claiming that it's supernatural.
Especially when you have Jesus claiming that he's God's uniquely divine Son and predicts his resurrection from the dead.
In short, the PSR is the metaphysical principle that every fact has an explanation, that is, a sufficient reason.
Yeah, the PSR is just basically saying you need a reason for everything.
Cause for how Jesus could have predicted this, admitting he had special knowledge, and if he claims that God will raise him from the dead, then he knew God raised him
Super
from
hot
the dead.
fire! Yeah. That's Easter egg number 1. We have 2 more of those to go. He actually made some new videos. Deshaun Raw on the whole super hot fire meme. All evidence relates to testimony. Multiply attested and supported claims qualifying as evidence. The Indian prince hears about this traveler talking about ice, and then more travelers come and testify to the existence of ice. And the question becomes, what kind of testimony can overturn uniform experience? At no point does the Indian prince take everyone to the North Pole to prove the existence of ice, or we take the word of astronauts. We take their testimonies and the testimonies that they actually were out of the far reaches of the atmosphere. In layman's terms, the best way I can describe this is like, if you're like a baby and then you see enough times that you put something in the sky and then it drops, you're going to assume something like the law of gravity. In the case of like the resurrection, you have to get the reference class correct. Say, for example, what kind of physics law says that people can't rise from the dead? Well, clearly we have resuscitation, so there's no such physical law that says that people can't rise from the dead. Oh, no. The physical law is people can't rise from the dead unless they have some medical assistance. Okay, well, how is God rising someone from the dead categorically different from medical assistance? Yeah, exactly. There's nothing like in terms of like law-like generalizations that would make us assume that there are no reasons to epistemically ascertain to belief in the resurrection. Miracles are supernatural / impossible, whereas extraordinary events are natural / possible, according to Peter Annett. Supernatural is synonymous with impossible, whereas extraordinary events are synonymous with natural / possible. Well, I mean, then the question becomes, can you conclude anything new? If everything that doesn't fit your prior worldview is quote unquote impossible or supernatural, can you reasonably come up with anything new? This is totally against what science stands for, coming up with new theories to better explain the world. And it seems to be saying that naive induction, just saying that, oh, as long as it doesn't fit my prior worldview, there's no way it can be true. Naive induction by enumeration works, or nothing does. And Hume's view, as we will see below, it's not much more sophisticated. It's repetitive, based off of predecessors. And if you're a baby who knows nothing, if you have no predecessors, if you just obey this weird law that you can't ascertain to belief in anything unless it fits your prior worldview, then you can conclude absolutely nothing. This is just another quote from David Hume, basically describing his maxim: no testimony for any kind of miracle can ever possibly amount to probability, much less to a proof. Another Easter egg video. So just for context, this video is supposed to say, if you're going to say you can't ascertain to new beliefs, then you cannot conclude anything. But I tried to do that all in 1 minute, so it's probably going to the message is not going to go across. The title. Grave news.
I'm happy to be shown that I'm wrong. If I tell you 10 things and 8 of them are correct, it tells you nothing at all about whether the other 2 are correct. Sometimes it does. No, it absolutely does not. It cannot.
Yeah, what about in the case of gravity?
The stone goes to the floor many times, then we generalize and that's induction.
Hillbilly dilly, you understand that your sloppy phrases is what allows us to smuggle in things, but don't seem to grasp that these are part of the same story.
My accent is so bad.
The scope of reliability is extended to the same author. If an effect is reliable, we can retrospectively infer a greater probability for the reliability of the cause. If you took your ideas seriously, you would be stuck in the abyss of zero knowledge.
That slap didn't age too well. Get it? Because Chris Rock was slapped. Oh man, okay. Alright, current slide. Categorical assumptions. Reference class is crucial in statistics. So on the thought experiment, we were discussing it earlier. There's no law of physics that says that humans cannot rise from the dead. Could it be the case that there are both natural atoms that are coming together to give the dead corpse of Jesus life, but also supernatural guidance, both natural and supernatural components? What does it mean to be naturally resurrecting and supernaturally resurrecting? What defines natural from supernatural? Epistemically, right? Just because they're different by nature, or the results of their conclusion, doesn't mean that we can't ascertain to them actually happening. It just means that you're going to have to accept that God exists at the end of accepting that Jesus rose from the dead. To illustrate the underlying categorical assumptions in our inquiry, take for example the following problems. The doomsday problem. What is the probability that the world as we know it will end? Well, David Hume would probably say something along the lines of, at least using his line of reasoning, well, humanity has never ended, therefore humanity will never end. Same thing with the resurrection. People stay dead, therefore people can never rise. Same thing with the sunrise problem. What is the probability that the sun will rise tomorrow? Well, the sun has always risen, so therefore it'll never expand into supernova and blow up. And the problem with this is that you're just asking the wrong question. You shouldn't be asking, how many times has the sun risen with respect to all of the days that have transpired? You should be asking something along the lines of, what is the probability of the sun expanding given the celestial orbit, given what we know about the age of stars, given the direction humanity is headed, and so on and so forth. You need the right reference class. You need the right question to frame the probability in a right manner to ascertain to the good probability. Same thing with lottery tickets. You don't say that, oh, well, no one wins the lottery, therefore if someone told me they won the lottery and showed me the ticket, I'm never going to believe it. That's just very wrong-headed. So as we have seen, closed naive induction will reason that humanity will never end because it has never ended, or that the sun will forever rise because it has always risen. Probability theory Bayesianism is amusing to note in passing that the Bayes rule for assigning prior probabilities makes the existence of Hume miracles a certainty. If you're going to assume that there is an inherent prior probability to something like the resurrection, under a statistical framework, basically what it amounts to is that you can never assign that probability 0. The possibility of miracles is a certainty. It's not to say that every miracle happens, or every miracle claim should be taken seriously, but what it does mean is that their mere possibility is a certainty. These are the two equations that he derives at conclusion on the left-hand side. Bayesian probability. So the probability that the hypothesis is true given the evidence and the background knowledge. Background knowledge refers to the probability of events happening by nature, and evidence refers to evidence for that specific event in time, is equal to probability of the hypothesis given the background knowledge times probability of evidence given the background knowledge and the hypothesis divided by probability of evidence. TLDR, you have to take both the evidence for that specific event and the background knowledge both into account when assessing miracle claims. Denial of possibility of miracles is to deny science. Hume's appeal to the straight rule of closed induction, namely that if we can't ever observe it, it'll never happen, is both descriptively inadequate to actual scientific practice and it is stultifying to scientific inquiry. Among the zillions of protons observed by particle physicists, none have been verified to decay, but particle physicists do not assign a probability of 1 to the proposition that the next proton to be observed will not decay. Basically what this is saying, particle physicists do acknowledge that there's such a thing called atomic decay, and just because it never happened doesn't mean that there aren't quarks, I believe that's the right subatomic particle for proton decay, trying to exit out of the proton or something like that. The point is that there's a theoretical underpinning of particle physics. No one has actually observed the actual decay. Further evidence would be waved away by naive induction. So that basically says that under Hume's understanding of miracles can never happen, if we were to take that logic very seriously, we would just be never being able to accept any amount of evidence to ascertain to the resurrection, which intuitively doesn't sound correct. There has to be some sort of limit that makes us finally say, okay, yeah, fine, the resurrection happened. Probability theory, multiple attestation through eyewitness testimony. Probability and multiple eyewitnesses, basically Thomas Bayes and Richard Price. I think it's mostly Richard Price. He goes through this crazy math, taking the assumptions of Bayesian statistics that says if independent witnesses can be found who speak truth more frequently than falsehood, it is always possible to assign a number of independent witnesses the improbability of the falsehood of whose concurring testimony shall be greater than the improbability of the miracle itself, as long as they are credible witnesses, as they witness to the same/similar category. TLDR, Hume's idea that he finally disproved miracles for good is just very wrong. This is another objection that Hume brings up. Oh yeah, well there are miracle claims that contradict each other, or at least ascertain to contradictory religions. In theory, there could be one religion that stands out with a super miracle, aka in our case it's Christianity and the resurrection. And even though it's contradictory to all these religions, there's nothing that prevents the possibility of all these religions being false and Christianity being true, so long as there is good evidence that stands out against these false religions.
You made it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell for more content. Got questions or ideas? Drop them in the comments below. Until then, next time, thanks for watching. This is Boy Paul signing out. Peace.